We have 1 weekend to build 3 tables. Everything's fine.
3 days and 3 tables. Easy, right? Well, kind of. As some people may know and others definitely don't, Vetere Custom Woodworks is spread out across the country, and this year Matthew and I were going to see our parents for Christmas, so I called him with a crazy idea. I said, "Hey Matthew, since I'm coming up to your neck of the woods for Christmas this year, want to make way too many tables in not enough time?" And he said, "Sure. Great. Perfect." So I threw some newly acquired white oak into my truck and took it up to our Vetere Custom Woodworks New Hampshire location, i.e. my brother's house, where we proceeded to start milling the lumber. So I will say there's not really much that is unique about the design of these tables, which is kind of the point. For one, I knew we were going to try to finish these in 3 days, with Christmas being one of those 3 days, so simplicity was key. And then secondly, we wanted these to match and accommodate a wide array of living spaces as well as people's tastes. Milling down this white oak lumber was pretty straightforward. Matthew and I cut it to rough length, he jointed one face and one edge while I planed the other side, and then he took all those pieces to the table saw and cut them to final rough dimensions. Like I said, this design is relatively simple, so at this point 70% of the work is done. We've ended up with a stack of clean wooden rectangles that will become the legs of all 3 of these tables. Okay, 70% might be pushing it a little bit. Probably 55%. The lumber that we had for the legs was rough zone, which required all of that milling, but the lumber for the tabletops was already S4S, which means surfaced 4 sides. So moving on to gluing up the panels for the tabletops was easy. All we had to do was joint opposing faces of the panel boards to ensure that the panels stay flat, and then glue them together. The I and O there means in and out. When I take the boards to the jointer, that tells me which face should be facing in towards the jointer fence and which should be facing out, away from the jointer fence. And the reason behind that is to alleviate any error that might be present in the angle of the fence. We all know that the angle should be exactly 90.00000 degrees, but it's not. No, not even I'm that perfect. This will help us get a perfectly flat panel every single time. And then in addition with the dominoes that are in there, aligning it perfectly, keeping it coplanar, this panel was super easy to put together. Just slap some glue on it, get it in some clamps, and wait for it to dry. Instead of repeating ourselves in the video, just imagine you watched us glue up 4 more panels for the nightstand tops and the shelves. However, the coffee table does have one more step. What we want to do with the coffee table is actually give the appearance that we have a 2-inch thick table without adding a whole nother panel like this to the top of the coffee table. So what we're going to do is we're going to add a ring of wood around the edge of our coffee table, and then what we're going to do is match the grains, because if we didn't match the grains like this, then it would look really funny. Trust me on this one. Because as we go around the circle, we go from edge grain to end grain, and then back to edge grain, and then end grain again. So we can't just do a full edge grain ring. What we have to do is we have to match the grains like this, and then we'll get that illusion that we have a 2-inch thick top with only a 1-inch thick panel. So I will say this looks way uglier than what it'll turn out to be. I only brought so much oak with me, so at this point we were working with scraps and cutoffs to make this ring. It's not like we could go to the lumberyard either. It was a few days before Christmas at this point, so the lumberyard was rightfully closed. This glue up did not go well either. You'll see everything just kind of starts falling apart. There are no perpendicular angles in order to get any clamps on here, which did not make this easy. Matthew is notorious for stressing out, thinking long and hard about the plan for his glue ups, and saying he was right behind me this whole time. I probably should have asked for some help, or at least taken a few notes from his bent lamination bar cabinet project before trying to glue this together. Now eventually it did come together, and after bringing it over to the CNC to cut out a nice perfect circle, cleaning it up a little bit on the router table with the flush trim bit, and of course a little sanding and gluing, we could create the illusion that our coffee table top is much thicker than it actually is. Okay, Now onto the table legs. These legs will cross on the bottom, and in order to do that, we need to cut what's called a cross half lap. That's when you cut two identical slots in both halves of the crossed pieces so that when you slide them together, everything fits nice and perfect. This is probably one of the easiest joints to do. It takes a few cuts on the table saw with a dado blade and a little patience to fine-tune the fit. Otherwise, a very simple joint. If you're a beginner woodworker out there and trying to get away from pocket holes or hardware to join your faces, this is definitely a good place to start. This is all keeping with the relatively simple nature of these tables. This is hopefully a set that we want to keep producing, and simple manufacturing is one of those things that will save countless hours in the long run. Plus, to get this first set completed, we only have 3 days, so simple is key. So did you know that coffee tables didn't actually start as coffee tables? In fact, their story begins with tea tables. Back in 18th and early 19th century England, tea was the drink of choice, and tables designed for it looked nothing like what we recognize today. They were tall, elegant pieces meant to stand beside upright chairs during formal gatherings, more about refinement than comfort. But as time went on, people started craving a more relaxed way to gather, a central piece of furniture to anchor conversation and leisure. By the late 1800s, as coffee overtook tea in popularity, the design began to shift. Early versions of the coffee table appeared, and some designers drew inspiration from Japanese furniture, particularly the shabudai, a low, legless table used for meals and socializing. That influence helped shape the idea of a shorter, more casual table for the living room. There's even a story from the early 1900s about F. Stewart Foote, the founder of the Imperial Furniture Company in Grand Rapids, Michigan. Supposedly, he took a dining table, sawed down the legs, and suddenly had the perfect height for serving coffee while sitting on a sofa. Whether or not that tale is entirely true, it captures the spirit of the coffee table's evolution. A piece born from the shift towards comfort, casual gatherings, and the growing coffee culture of the late 19th and early 20th centuries. So the coffee table isn't just a piece of furniture. It's a reflection of how people come together, shifting from formality to comfort, from tea to coffee, from stiff-backed chairs to sofas around a low table. So if you're looking for a coffee table like this to serve morning coffee on, as well as a couple of end tables if you're the unfortunate one sitting in the corner who can't quite reach the coffee table, head over to VetereCustomWoodworks.com and you can find these for sale in our store. If you're interested in your very own custom coffee table or dining table, shoot us a message and we would love to help you bring some quality furniture to your home and help you gather those friends and family around a piece of furniture that will last generations. Now, if you have no interest in a coffee table, dining table, etc., but just like our videos, please consider hitting that subscribe button and leaving a comment telling us what you've enjoyed about the video. We like hearing your thoughts, and it's one way that you can help us grow our channel at zero cost to you, other than 15 seconds of your time. Thank you, and we really appreciate the support. So we got as far as dry fitting everything together during our 3 days over Christmas. Let's just say a couple of elements took a little longer than expected. One being this middle shelf that you'll see I casually took away when I started working on these again in our Maryland location. As nice as this little shelf would be, I don't know, maybe a good place for a picture frame or something, it is probably the reason why we didn't meet our goal of 3 tables in 3 days, which was also more like 3 tables in 12 hours total. And again, keeping the goal of having a simple design that's slightly easier to manufacture, this added one too many elements that weren't helping reach that goal. But now these are actually pretty close to being done. However, over the couple of months that these sat in my shop waiting for me to get back to them on my to-do list, the change in temps, moisture, and all that made the wood move a little, so I had to go back and refine the cross-lap joints, as well as square up the bottoms and tops of the legs again. But something else I wanted to do too after taking a look at it after a few months, I wasn't a huge fan of how wide the legs were on the end tables, or how close they came to the edges of the top. So I decided to trim up the legs a little bit. which I think really helped the final look of the piece, as subtle as this may be. Since the legs do taper out slightly, I needed to make a reference edge that I could run up against the table saw fence. To do this, I used a scrap piece of MDF, made sure it was squared, and then just screwed down the legs with some of my CNC hold-down clamps. Super easy and took no time at all to make this change. And with that, the last manufacturing step is underway. Right now, the corners are still sharp and not so pleasing to the eye or feel. So once I give each sharp edge a final 1/4 inch roundover, it'll be time to move on to sanding and final assembly. And now comes everyone's favorite part, sanding. Everything was already brought up to a rough 120 grit back at Matthew's shop. So now I'll be taking it up to the final grit of 180. Contrary to what some might believe, you don't always want to go chasing ultra fine grits if your goal is a lasting finish. In fact, going too fine can actually work against you. Let me explain here. As you raise the grit, you progressively smooth out the wood surface and reduce the size of the scratches. But if you push that too far, the wood fibers actually begin to compress or close up, bunching those wood fibers together. The tighter surface can make it harder for a finishing oil, stain, or sealer to penetrate far enough into the grain to provide adequate protection. In essence, you seal off the pores to the finish. On furniture like this, sanding beyond 180 to 220 grit often offers diminishing return on investment. And in this case, the investment is time. Now, if you are looking to actually polish the surface, then of course, this is a little different. You have to go beyond 220 grit, since while polishing, the whole point is to sand those fibers and compress the grain so smooth that it becomes a mirror finish. However, good luck applying a finish to a polished surface. It just won't penetrate deep enough to make any difference whatsoever. That's why 180 grit is commonly considered a sweet spot for many hardwoods and types of finish. It's fine enough that you won't see visible sanding scratches after finishing, but not so fine that the surface becomes too dense or closed off for the finish to do its job. So I'll go through slowly working the surface until it reaches that perfect balance, smooth enough to look refined, but open enough to let the finish soak in and protect the piece for years to come. So I know what I said before about the crosslap joint, that if you're really trying to get away from hardware, it's a great joint to do for beginners, which is true, and I stand by that. But one thing I've learned over the years is that keeping things simple keeps the shop running smoothly, and small choices can make a big difference. This joint is the perfect example, at least for this project. I'm using both glue and a screw. The glue provides long-term strength and rigidity, but the screw lets me hold it all together in the short term to let me move on to the next step without waiting for the glue to dry. It's these little efficiencies that add up over the course of a build. The shop isn't just about tools and wood. It's about workflow, timing, making smart decisions that let you focus on the parts of woodworking you actually enjoy, rather than getting bogged down in waiting or unnecessary steps. That's what helps keep each project smooth, satisfying, and, well, keeps me coming back. Which again is the same reason I decided on hardware to attach the tabletops. Recessing the hardware to attach the legs for the side tables was necessary in order to keep the hardware hidden, which was easy to do on the drill press. Just like Adam did in his 24 karat gold spacebar jewelry box video, I used double-sided sticky tape to transfer the holes from the hardware to the wood. This step probably wouldn't have been necessary if the holes in the hardware I got were actually centered. These still worked well, but I guess I'll have to find new hardware for next time. This step was even easier on the coffee table, saying there was a lip on the side of the table to hide the hardware, so instead I recessed the hardware into the leg, which works even better, and no double-sided sticky tape aligning necessary. When Matthew and I decided to spend our Christmas break building these tables, we definitely got a few funny looks. And I'm sure some of you are wondering the same thing. Why would you spend your vacation working in the shop? It's a fair question. People often ask if we ever just sit down and relax, since most of our free time is spent in the shop, either on client projects, personal builds, or working on videos like this one. But here's the truth. This is how we relax. For me personally, there is nothing more calming than throwing on an audiobook or some music, tucking my phone out of reach, and getting lost in the project. The thing is, this time around was even better than that, because it wasn't just me in the shop. It was Christmas, which means family time, and this project truly became a family affair. Obviously, Matthew and I were side by side in the shop working on this together, but what you didn't see was my dad in the background hanging out and taking pictures. My wife doing some camera work, or also just hanging out, having fun. And our little brother and Vetere Custom Woodworks' very own 3D printing specialist, Joseph, also lending a hand. So while some people might think we're giving up family time to work, for us, this is family time. And that's what makes projects like these so special. At the end of the day, these tables are more than just furniture. For us, building them was about spending time together as a family. And for generations, coffee tables have played that same role, bringing people together to share a meal, stories, and make memories. That's the heart of what we do at Vetere Custom Woodworks. Create pieces that don't just fill a space, but become part of the moments that matter most. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next build.
We have 3 days to build 3 tables.
Everything's fine.
We have 1 weekend to build 3 tables.
Where are all the pencils?
We have 1 weekend to build 3 tables.
Where's Adam?
Hold on, I'm still laughing. We have 1 weekend to build 3 tables.